Just want to do an update. It's going to take a little bit of video to do this, but an update on the gun regulations, the upcoming election, and basically where we sit and all amongst that sort of stuff. I'll break it down into some sections as much as I can, and put some time slots down the bottom there so that you can go through that, because it will take a little bit of time to go through all this. First of all will be an update on the situation it is with the various parties and bits and pieces. Then our legal position as we sit, in the fashion of understanding what you have to do and don't have to do and that sort of stuff. A discussion on what we should do in the upcoming sort of events that are coming, and immediately prior to the election and after the election. Also go through and discuss the parties' position as to the political parties and their position. So voting matters a lot here, so their position really matters. Reiterate about preferential voting, understanding that preferential voting is your vote carries the preferences. The parties do not. So your vote carries the preferences. And then to finish off with a bit of a conversation in a way of doing what we don't want to do, but becoming a little more politically minded and having discussions with, whether that's family members or that's friends and the people who just haven't woken up, and find ways to get to that place. So we'll start with, like I said, a situation update. For those that don't know, basically the firearms regulations that have been put together by our police minister and the parts of the hierarchy of our police force are basically fixing a problem that doesn't exist, and creating a new set of regulations that I wouldn't necessarily say we don't need our regulations refined a little, sorted out a little, maybe looked at through the perspective of 2025, but that's not what's happened here at all. They've put together regulations to try and make it, with an obvious main goal of trying to make it too hard to own a firearm at all. That's the obvious main goal. It's written in that sort of fashion. It's under the guise of make it safer for all West Australians, but in actual fact they're constructing something that is not practical to operate in a police force that is already struggling with numbers, already well behind in its numbers because of the toxic culture that they've created in that police force, and because of the nature of our police minister. They're already low in numbers, and yet they're putting something together which would take 10 times the numbers of police and systems that they don't have and money that they don't have to actually put in place. But it's really, when you look at it, when you step back and look at what's written, it's much more about the fact of let's make them give up their firearms. And I think that's not just for the future, it is also immediately designed for this election. If we can get them to give up half the firearms, then we can say we've got these firearms off the street, so we're saving you West Australians, so vote for us or vote for me. So then none of those firearms are on the street. They're not bothered with the firearms that the criminals have. That's not what these laws are about at all. These are about law-abiding gun owners that have been doing the right thing for years, if not decades, in more than the right thing than the average person, a safer sport than the average sport. Everything in the way of more compliant, more doing the right thing. It is much more about, maybe there's other bigger agendas, but it's much more a propaganda thing about votes and about disarming the population. So that comes from a gun guy, so I can look with a grain of salt. When it really comes down to our situation, it's about the bigger picture, it's about the nature of how this happened. There was millions of dollars spent on a review to sort something out. The police didn't like what the review board, the trained professional, professor-driven review board, come up with what they should do. They didn't want to do that. They threw that up. They don't want to even read it because it didn't have the answers they wanted. It didn't have what they wanted in it. Then once they started doing their process, there was supposed to be consultation. Basically, their consultation was, we're telling you what we're going to do. We don't want to hear what you want to know, what you want to tell us. And then a pretend of a consultation. They have ignored the largest ever e-petition, completely put it to one side, don't care, don't want to know about it. Where they're supposed to reply to every submission that's written in to say, I don't like this, decided, no, they're all too generic looking. They might be a little bit different, but they look like they're too generic looking, so we'll ignore that. When it tried to go through Parliament to where it is reviewed, that sort of stuff, there were too many political things saying that this is wrong, this is hard to use. So they shut it down and just tried silence talk on it, not allowed to talk on it, just ramming it through. So that's happened in other places in what the Labor Party are up to. The firearm side of things is a very good example of it, but that's what the situation we're at and what we're dealing with. So the groups that have sort of fought back against that is both some of the sporting groups and the sporting firearms owners or groups I should say, that have been involved in trying to make some sense of this and trying to push back a bit against this. And there was recently a gun rally put on by the West Australian Shooters Union, much more for the non-shooter, non-club groups. So the majority of firearm owners, in truth, the people who just have a firearm to, whether it's hunting or it's pest control or it's plinking, whatever it is, they have a firearm and they aren't a part of a group because you don't need to be to be a licensed firearm owner. And it was to support them, to support those people. There was a bit of pushback, there was a bit of negativeness from I think there's egos and power maniacs and things involved with some of the other side of it. So there was a bit of negative from our side, which was sad to see. We should be all combined together. But in saying that, all the things of how bad it could be with the rally, that sort of stuff, it wasn't. Me and Sam were there. It was good, really polite. It was nice, neat and tidy, good speakers, that sort of stuff. There was a little over 1,500 people, so probably a little low in its numbers, but it certainly didn't create any negatives whatsoever. So in the future, going forward, you want to be involved with that sort of stuff. Ignore the naysayers, go along, do the right things, and show that you're part of this community. So that's as for where we're going beyond that point. I suppose that's what's actually happening in the brew of where it's moving forward. What is sitting right at the moment is that their laws have been rammed through and have the last step they've got to do happens on the 31st of March. So it's 3 weeks after the election. And regardless of what actually happens in the election, and hopefully West Australians wake up to the Labor Party is running roughshod over the people. They don't care about the people. They're doing a terrible job financially. Cost of living's out of control. They're taking away beaches and national parks. Their woke concepts or woke processes of CRT and DEI and all that sort of stuff that's happening all over the place in our schools and around the place, that the government have a certain amount involved with and could be a certain amount on our side rather than that side, that people are waking up to that and go and kick them out. Or maybe they don't, maybe they haven't. That would be a terrible thought, but maybe they haven't. Regardless, after that 31st of March, there is been written in the police report, in the police websites, that sort of stuff, a 90-day grace period. So you have 90 days to sort stuff out, even if the worst case scenario. So don't stress with trying to get rid of the firearm at the last moment or do this sort of stuff just right then. Don't do that sort of stuff. You don't need to do that. That you're not complying to a law until they will notify you of your situation. They will tell you the date of that sort of stuff, and it is written as to 90 days as to where to go. There are also legal groups getting ready to fight this if they try and get out of control. They're raising funds to be ready to do this sort of stuff. So don't stress. You're not alone, and don't stress about that. There is a grace period. And that's regardless. If the party gets in or if they get kicked out, there's still a period of time where the police minister will stay there until I don't know if it's 2 weeks or whatever it is, but he'll stay there. So he could still sort of do that, but not with the fact there is a grace period being written. The most likely thing, or the most hopeful thing, I think it's the most likely thing, is the best Labor will get back in is with a minority. With the minority, then the upper house, when it goes through that process with enough of the right people on the other side, and certainly Nationals have pledged, certainly the independents and the small parties have all said the moment they're carrying a seat in the upper house, they're going to say, listen, no, this note needs to go back to review. So there's a strong chance it's going to go back to review. So that's our legal situation, not something to be panicking about. I suppose the next bit I want to get onto is what we should be doing as a firearms community. Well, immediately, we should be voting the right way. Obviously, votes really matter. We're only a small percentage of Western Australia, but our problem, which is this particular one, is firearms, is very, very similar to the problems of whether you're a farmer or you're a fisher, or you're a bushwalker, or you've got a kid in school, or you are of the numerous other things that are actually happening around here. Whether you care about what the government's doing in the way of money, whether you care about what's happening in the way of infrastructure, whether you care of the way our government processes are happening. The more you look into it and the more conversation you have about it, you find this people are upset in all sorts of ways. And firearms and what we've got going in firearms is just a really good example of what a government that isn't listening to the people can do. So having the conversation is also relevant. I'll get more into that in a minute at the end of the video, but having the conversation certainly matters with people, and that's the other thing that we should be doing in the way of heading into this election. Seeing how many people understand and then go through some of these other details of what we're talking about. The other side of things is on the other side of the election, regardless of the result, even if it's the best result we can get and it gets pushed back to review, that's only one little tiny pushback. It's only out of 1,000 cuts, that's only 3 cuts off type thing, 3 cuts that get bandaged. The rest are still open in there. We have to get together, we have to combine as a community, we have to do more as a community. My suggestion is the pro-gun advertising and work out how to fundraise that or to raise the funds for that, to do that and actually let the whole of Australia know that we shooters have fun, do the right thing, we're part of the community, and make us all proud and be prepared to be proud about doing that side of things. So take away the hidden message or the open negative propaganda and replace it with positive propaganda about firearms owners in Western Australia. I think all over the world this sort of stuff should be happening, but it can happen if we're smart about doing that. Getting together as a group in the way of stop the infighting sort of thing, the egomaniacs, the control nuts, that sort of stuff, the people who have to have their way of doing things, no, that has to change. We have to be able to sit down with the politicians and with the police as a group in some form or other that has everyone represented. And the moment we have someone some group that needs to be in more control of that sort of stuff, then that attitude needs to change or they don't carry the weight of most shooters. That's very simple. It needs to come from the shooters and it needs to be organised in that fashion. And that's also where we can do the raising for funds and working out the advertising, that sort of stuff. There's lots of good people. We say it all the time. There's doctors, there's surgeons, there's lawyers, there's mechanics, there's nurses, there's the fit, the unfit, you name it. We have very smart people in our community. It's about time we started working with them and they started working with us to actually work this out and get it to where we've got control over the situation, to where we have the safe, wonderful sport that we have, but it's not doesn't come across as a threat to someone else or anyone else, because it simply isn't. So that's going forward. There's a lot more to do on this other side of the fence, but unity would be the main thing I would say. Okay, so that's that little lot there. Now I'll get into the voting and the political parties, how they actually sit. Who should you be voting for? How does this all work? Okay, well, with the parties, what we have, I suppose to start off with, people say put Labor last. I don't quite agree with that. I think they certainly need telling off for sure, but and definitely they are left-leaning. They are out of control. A majority. I think the majority side of things is as bad as the general position of the Labor Party. But majority certainly power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely, and we see a really good example of that. Our political system with the two-party system, which we sort of have. Well, we do have, but I say sort of for a reason. I'll explain that in a minute. The moment any one of them gets in there with full power of these corporate entities that you may as well refer to our major parties, then they tend to run roughshod over things. They are a little too entrenched at this sort of stuff and a little too used to expecting they have the power. I believe the best way we can control that at this stage at least, is to have the smaller parties or the independents need to be there, particularly in the upper house in Western Australia, but all over the place, to actually keep the bastards honest. People who are watching out for us. So that's, and there's the referred to as freedom first parties. There's other ways that people are going to talk about sort of stuff. But basically guys who are there that care about all the things that the average real conservative cares about. So I'm talking about things like smaller government, not larger government. So less government control. Bring government size down. Make government a lot more efficient. Make our financial decisions much more about making our country better rather than our mates better, or whatever it is. I don't know if I'd go as far as corruption. Maybe it's just ineptitude that we're dealing with, but certainly when you look at some of the financial decisions and political decisions we're up to, they don't make any sense. Basically some controlled level of immigration, not out of control immigration to try and fit your budget, but actually controlled immigration that makes sense, so we can keep this country growing but do it on the right side of things. Removing the likes of DEI, removing the woke attitude we've got around the place, making sense of our world as to real merit-based appointments, that sort of thing. Come back to that sort of place. And that is also get the government out of making decisions for the people and the government start making the decisions for the people. So what I mean by that is basically our larger parties, and as I referred to them as corporate entities. If you stop looking at them as we think of a political party as they're supposed to be largely there for the people. We vote them in to do what we want to do. Well, we vote them in, you got that bit right, but then they work like a corporation. The corporations are for corporations, they're not for the people. Well, our big parties are for the big parties, they're not for the people. To the point where Labor actually has rules on the major stuff that goes across the floor. Everyone has to vote the way of the top of the leaders of that group. And those leaders of that group, the top 5 or whatever they are, I don't know if they're necessarily making the decisions either. It's the other people pulling the strings behind the veil that are more likely making those decisions. So as a corporation would be, it is actually driven down the road of what the corporation wants. And that's why we see some of this stuff that we shake our head at. And promises are always broken. If we get back to where they are there for their constituents, they are there for the people, then promises aren't broken. Promises are promises that need to be held because that's the only reason you're there. If you're not there, you get voted out. We don't do it that way a little bit because we're locked in mentally to a two-party system. Because we still have this conversation of you're not voting for Labor, then you must be voting for Liberal. And it's only the weird bloke who's voting for One Nation or for an independent or something else, that sort of stuff. It's only the outlier. If we were all the outlier and we all decided, okay, we're voting for this person here, we'd change our system. And the argument that the likes of Cook's government, the Labor government got at the moment is that they're more experienced. I really struggle as to how you can use that argument with a straight face. When you've messed it up so much, you're showing that your experience is a bad experience and you've given us a bad experience. People with real understanding of what's going on, people with the proper business understanding, people with proper moral obligations that really listen to the people, they get voted in on a particular thing and going to make something happen that's of relevance to our country, then they don't need experience to make sure they do this right. They need to go through and do this right. That's what smart people do. So voting in smart people that care about us, the people, are far more relevant than a government that, like I said, whether it's inept or it's corrupt, doesn't really matter. Our experience with them shows that their experience isn't any good to us. So my comment would be, understand that. Now, the political parties that we have obviously Labor that have said, well, they're doing all the things they're doing. Running a bit rogue, really don't care what the people think too much, apart from maybe their neighbourhood, but they're doing what they're doing. The Greens, the people put Labor last, the Greens are going to do that times 5. The Greens and the Teals might sound like bush huggers and that sort of stuff, or they like the animals and the flora and the fauna and that sort of stuff, but they're really much more about even more authoritarianism, opening up the borders even wider. You name it, it will go down the road. The DEI, all that sort of stuff would amplify a lot. So My vote is definitely going to go where the Teals and the Greens are on the bottom and Labor's just below them. So that's all the bottom of it. Just above that is the Liberals. I think the Liberals are a better option, but to me, they're only just above that. Above that, and the first of the majors which I'd put in there, which have pledged to support us, that type of thing, are the Nationals. Now, whether there's some gaps in between, I don't know, but Nationals are certainly on our side. They still are a bit of a corporate machine. They're still very heavily attached to the Liberals, so I wouldn't put them right at the top. Right at the top, there's probably four that I know that are going to do the right thing by us, and they are the small parties. They are the keep the bastards honest, or freedom first, or whatever you want to call it. But they're the guys up there. If we have one or two of them, particularly in the upper house, then they are going to be the ones that hold the checks on these career politicians, these people who are really there for the corporation, and we need some of them up there. So they are SFF. There used to be shooters, fishers and farmers. Now SFF, they've realised that shooters calling at the front of their name pushes away too many people. So going with SFF, and that can also stand for Select Freedom First. Very much down that road, very much about down the road of going for less government rather than more government, going for better financial control, so fiscal responsibility and making sense of our decisions in Australia. The pushbacks on DEIs, the pushbacks on all the war on the weekend, that sort of stuff, certainly push that back there as much as they can. And in most places, not having boys in girls' bathrooms, basically some of the irrational stuff that's coming from the left, they're very much on the other side too. So they're very high up for me. They also have pledged to work with the Nationals, or I should say work with the Nationals. They're going to try and put a candidate in every one of the metropolitan seats where there isn't a Nationals option. So basically this is very much about the major problems we've got at the moment with war on the weekends, particularly with our firearms side of things, where the Nationals are pledged there. So that's what SFF are doing to fill up that gap. So it gives people a choice to vote for them. But it's not just about shooting by any means. It's very much about the state of government, the state of where a country's going, and very much more want to go probably a little bit where the rest of the world is going in the way of sorting things out and bringing it back to conservative values. So they're right up there. Libertarians, very, very similar. Lots of positive, lots of shooters actually in libertarians. Very similar sort of values. They're standing by themselves. They're not pledging. I don't know what other stuff they're involved with, but they very much are on our side. And then One Nation. One Nation's doing a good job with the Malcolm Roberts and the likes of Pauline are definitely some of the people trying to keep the bastards honest in the national side of things. They also, there's a lot of, from my understanding, at least from what I've seen, Pauline and the way the party's been run has a lot more control. There's less of the rogue element. There's more of the making sense of things, and very much about those same sort of freedom first things. One Nation, it's about being more combined as a nation. It's about being more for Australians and government for the Australian people. So One Nation. And the other one that is also moderately pro-gun is the Christian Party. Anyone or all of those four above is the top preferences I would go with. And for those people who say, well, listen, I really want to vote for Nationals, but I do see those guys there, but I don't really want to waste my vote on them because they probably won't get in. Well, in the preference side of things, you can put one or four of them up top that, okay, if they don't get in, you voted for Nationals. If they do get in, you're one of the guys, your vote put one of the gatekeepers, one of the keep the bastards honest people or groups, parties, up there to keep the bastards honest. So to me, that's a win in both directions. Like if they don't get in, then you've got the Nationals in. That's my way of looking at it as on the preference side of things. So that's pretty much the position of the parties. There's some other ones I would say, that's my interpretation. That's what I've read about that side of things. Certainly go through and read, do the research and make sense of what you can see of what the parties are. But certainly when it comes to SFF, formerly Shooters, Fishers and Farmers, when it comes to Libertarians, then those two of West Australian driven groups, they are very, very much on our side and very much worth being the top of the ticket. Nationals have pledged to look after us in the way of the firearm side of things, so they are very much worthwhile being up there. And like I said, One Nation has always been on that sort of side to one degree or another. Okay, so that's the party's position as to I understand it. Certainly Labor, Greens, Teals, down the bottom of the thing, and those people who are voting, if you've got people who are voting for Greens and they think they're voting for the people who care about the environment, you do some reading on what they really stand for. But understand they are far closer to a socialist couple of parties, far more about all the things that actually would take Australia away, even worse so than what Labor is. But do the research. Don't take it from my word, do the research. Certainly Labor need to be right down there. Labor need to learn a big lesson from this sort of stuff. There's a lot of mistakes here that, you know, who knows, maybe they'll turn back into a good party if everyone gets the boot and they've got another bunch of people in there. And for those people who think that Labor is, I heard a comment the other day from someone who said, oh, this is the last time I'm voting for Labor. I voted for them all the time before because I thought with the unions we would get more money. No, Labor are flat out making promises to everyone. Promises that they largely can't keep. And promises that they'll put us further and further into debt for. That whole promise, we'll buy you a new swimming pool, we'll put this money in here, we'll put this money in there, trying to buy your vote. This is the time to not go for what they can give you in the way of money. This is the time to straighten up this ship. We're heading over a cliff. Let's straighten up this ship. Let's get it back to where we've got some control. Let's get back to where life and independence and freedom and not being monitored, not being controlled, smaller government, all that sort of stuff are really, really important. And we're on the cusp of things at the moment. There is big issues and try and get that message across. So I suppose that moves into the last bit that I really want to talk about, and that is exactly what I'm doing right now, is the conversation. Which goes down the road of the mistake that I hear a lot of gun guys talk about in all sorts of stuff, is when they want to talk about the political parties, they want to talk about their problem. It's a very, I suppose, modern Western thing, maybe it's just a West Aussie thing, but it's a very common thing to do. This is my problem with them and that's why I don't want them in there. So it makes some sense and it's very easy to have that conversation. But if you're a gun guy, you just lost the majority of people's vote. You lost their interest or you lost their vote. They'll vote against you because you got guns, that sort of stuff. There's a lot of negative propaganda out there about firearms. It's been there for a lot of years and we've done nothing to fix it in all truth. So we can't fully pass the buck on there. We should have fixed that. But it is a situation at the moment. So in being smart about it, our conversation is only relevance. The gun side of things is only relevance when it comes to making it is what it is, a very good example of what the government have done regardless of the people. Regardless of all the professionals, regardless of every other voice, they're doing what they want to do. Which that's the same as what they did with the Cultural Heritage Act, that's same what they're doing with the fisheries, that's same what's happening federally with immigration, it's the same what's happened federally with the Keep the Sheep, and attaching our Labor government to Albanese, to the federal Labor government, is a really good conversation because they really are lockstep a lot of ways, pretend to be individual, not so much whatsoever. We just have more money because we're selling the land to all over the place because of the way we're dealing with our country, which is a short-term plan at best, and we end up poorer for it. But my comment is it's much more finding the other things that are wrong. Now, whether that's four-wheel drivers who are can't go anywhere because of this, whether the car guys and what's happening with our finding systems, with our traffic, with that side of it, with the speed cameras all over the place. Whether it's talking about the beaches that are being chained off that people don't know about. You go to Esperance and down south, that sort of stuff. There's beaches that are really being taken away. You're not allowed on them anymore. Not a lot of logical things about saving reefs and things. It doesn't really make any sense. It's what's going on with the shutting down the fisheries side of things. Whether it's the critical race theory, with some of the very woke stuff that is going into, and woke's a whole big description of all sorts of stuff that are, the more you find out what's actually happening in our schools and realise that our government is going down that road, those conversations are really worth attaching to. To the largest degree, attaching to your family members' issues that they have, or your friends' issues of what they have, and understanding that's coming from, then refocus them. It's not the school board you're worried about that's doing this, it's actually attached to our government, and that's what's actually happening. And a different government in there with different values would do things differently. So that goes across the board in so many places. There's not too many people that don't have some pretty big issue with some government department or the way it's actually happening, the way our state is functioning, the waste of money on the roads, the shut down this, the open up that, this sort of stuff. Yes, a lot of people are very self-focused on their own problem, but in attaching to that, understanding what that is, then our firearm side of things can very much be on their side. Sometimes it should never be raised because when we haven't got to that place, but that conversation to go with, okay, well, this comes from our government. And then also when it comes to just simply going with the logic we have, this mindset that we're a two-party system, we actually have the choice of being something else. If we just all stopped voting for one or the other and started voting for others and make them, as we systematically go through that and understand that there's people that have our values more, there's parties that have our values more than our major parties, then we will have more than a two-party system, or we'll have a different two-party system. But it is understanding that it isn't just vote for the other guys. It isn't, I'm voting for Labor because I'd never vote for Liberal. No, let's talk about the problem and let's actually do the talk about who's actually going to do a better job. There's also very good independents out there that really do stand. They want to be the gatekeepers too. They want to be in that sort of place there too. And you get enough of them that are working together. And there's independents out there that are definitely against what's happening in the firearm side of things. They're against a lot of this sort of stuff. So that may be one of the ones that you need to put in the top of your table as well. But that conversation and having that conversation, the main thing I want to say about it is starting and complaining about the gun laws. As right as you are, there's no question, they're doing everything right. What too many people hear is, I don't want them to take my guns away. And that's the wrong way to do this. That's not going to help. That's not going to be constructive of that side of things. There's people that some will go, well, I'll vote for them because I don't want you to have guns. So, and that's simply, to some degree or another, okay, that's that sort of person. But it's the way you did the conversation. If you go at a different angle, that person may well be on your side. And firearms are only worth mentioning in this environment as a good example, or maybe not at all for some folks. There's a lot of other things that are really going wrong in this world, and what's going on with our political party at this moment, with Labor at the moment. So changing that is the most important thing. And most of the others are on our side. Like I said, there's other ones to research there. Teals and greens, yeah, they'd take your guns quick smart too. Well, okay, well listen, that's the basics of it. We've got an update, where we're at, what's going on there. We've got our legal situation at the moment. Don't panic, you got a grace period to go through that process. A bit of an idea of what we should be doing now, election and in the upcoming months and years. A bit of an idea of the political position of the parties, where they stand on that sort of stuff. Understand preference voting, very important, and the conversation. Make sense of the conversation. Like I said, the gun conversation is only for some people. There's lots of other things you can talk about and get people on side with. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for checking in. I hope you liked. I'm sorry it was a bit long, but other than that, we'll catch you next time.